Hello and welcome to Crossroads of Rockland History. I'm Clare Sheridan from the Historical Society of Rockland County. Thank you for tuning in. Today I'll be speaking with award-winning author Eve Kahn as she returns to discuss her latest work ahead of her March presentation at Sloatsburg Harmony Hall. The focus will be on her new book, Queen of Bohemia Predicts Own Death, Gilded Age journalist Zoe Anderson Norris, published by Fordham University Press. The Historical Society of Rockland County is a nonprofit educational institution and principal repository for original documents and artifacts relating to Rockland County. Its headquarters is a 4-acre site featuring a history museum and the 1832 Jacob Lawveld House located at 20 Zucker Road in New City, New York. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places and a designated New York State Path Through History site. And part of our broad and challenging mission is to share the history of Rockland County with the public. Our annual appeal is underway, and I hope you will consider making a tax-deductible contribution. The Historical Society relies on financial support from people just like you. If you're interested in donating or becoming a member of the Society or learning about volunteer opportunities, please visit our website at rocklandhistory.org. Independent scholar Eve Kahn, former antiques columnist at the New York Times, writes about art, architecture, and design for the Times, among other publications. She is biographer of artist Mary Rogers Williams, 1857 to 1907, and writer Zoe Anderson Norris, 1860 to 1914. Welcome back to Crossroads, Eve Kahn. Before we begin speaking about your new book and the presentation at Harmony Hall, please take a moment to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
I am a regular contributor to the New York Times, among other publications, including the art magazine Apollo, the art newspaper Preservation Magazine. I live in New York with my husband, Brad Coleman, and our daughter who's a journalist, and lives in Brooklyn. And we share our home with a glorious black cat named Cleopatra. And it is said that I write mainly these days about women with 3 names. Because, Claire, this is the 3rd time I've been on this podcast with you. We spoke about Edith Varian Cockcroft, artist based in Sloatsburg. We spoke about the photographer Anna Frances Levens, and now we're working on Zoe Anderson Norris.
I love it. The title of the book, Queen of Bohemia Predicts Own Death, Gilded Age journalist Zoe Anderson Norris, it really draws the reader in right away. And at the same time, it says so much about her. So tell us a little bit about that.
Zoe Anderson Norris was born in rural Kentucky in 1860. She had a bad first marriage, a chunk of which was spent in Wichita, Kansas. By 1900, she came to New York, and she supported herself and her family with a fire hose of fiction and journalism. And she published millions of words. And a lot of it, her fiction, a lot of it is autobiographical, and a lot of her journalism is told in the first person. So we know how she came to be known as the Queen of Bohemia, and she had a circle of friends. She focused on advocacy for immigrants. She documented desperate immigrant poverty, but she also had a lot of fun. She called her friends the Ragged Edge Club with a K, and she became known while running the Ragged Edge Club as the Queen of Bohemia. One of the essays she published, millions of words, was about her dream premonition that she was going to die soon. And at age 53, she had just mailed out an issue of her own magazine with that dream premonition in it, and she died. So I'm quoting the hundreds of headlines in newspapers nationwide that publish some variant of the phrase Queen of Bohemia Predicts Own Death in my biography title.
How did you learn about Zoe Anderson Norris?
Zoe published a bi-monthly magazine called The East Side, 29 issues between 1909 and her death in 1914. I am a member of a unique hybrid club library museum called the Grolier Club on 60th between Park and Madison, open to the public for free since the 1880s. 2 gorgeous galleries related to the history of the printed word and image. There's a Grolier member named Steve Lemaizo, who's a neurologist and a historian. He's obsessed with American magazines. He owns, at last count, 83,000 of them, dating back to the 1730s. In the fall of 2018, a group from the Groyer Club went to visit his home in New Jersey that he shares with his equally amazing wife, Susie Bien-Aimé. And he's got hundreds and hundreds of magazines in each room. And at one point, he handed me a bound volume of 6 issues of Zoe's East Side magazine and said, she's an underappreciated 1910s innovator. The world should know more about her. He handed it to me, Zoe Anderson Norris. I start leafing through the East Side magazine. I realize, oh, she's documenting sympathetically recent arrivals through Ellis Island in the 1910s who are these are she would have walked past, encountered, documented people like my own mother's parents and aunts and uncles who were newly arrived from Ukraine in various states of disrepair on the Lower East Side in the 1910s. And I thought, oh, who's this woman documenting my own ancestors? Her own name runs huge on her pages, and her own image runs huge on her pages, as well as gorgeously sympathetic illustrations and writings about the desperate immigrant poor. And I thought, oh, who is this woman? Why don't I know anything about her? And why isn't there even the most basic Wikipedia page about her? And that's the beginning of my journey, Claire, in the fall of 2018.
Wow, that's amazing. As you got into it, did you did you think it would always be a book, or what did you think would happen with the research you were doing?
So, a number of women I know who've written biographies of women, including Janice Nomura, have used the phrase you need an ocean of material in order to do a book, right? You need to sift out an ocean of material into whatever, 300 pages, including footnotes. And I wasn't sure Zoe would be a book. I contacted her family. There's direct descendants around. They don't have much by way of her papers, but she published millions of words. And as I said, it's either autobiographical fiction or it's first person journalism. She basically lived in print. She was like a modern day blogger. So I can tell you what she was thinking and feeling and what she and where exactly she was standing while thinking and feeling that on any given day in some cases. The more I dug into it, the more I realized how much was digitized or how much of her publications were digitized or in institutional collections. I realized I can pull this off.
As with your other book and the articles that you've written, it's meticulously researched. You had to have gone far and wide to places, all sorts of places. Where did you end up going to do this research?
So I started in fall of 2018. COVID shut down a lot of the collections by March of 2020. By then, I'd done a little tourism. I reached out to every imaginable institutional collection that might have a wisp of paper related to someone who knew her. I landed in gold mines that way. Even a poet who's just briefly mentioned in her writings, a vivid letter she wrote him, a vivid, angry letter about a turning point in her life turned up in his files on Staten Island. And I also contacted descendants of people she knew, not just her own family. She had a huge family. She was the 13th of 15 children. And I contacted every sibling's descendants that I could find. In terms of travel, I went multiple times to Kentucky, where she was born and raised, and multiple times to Wichita, Kansas, where she spent an unhappy chunk of her first married life.
Hmm.
And I also, with apologies to all of the street easy real estate agents whose time I wasted, made appointments. I tried to get in honestly, Claire. I emailed countless people who were the managing team of buildings where I know she lived and worked. And I said, I'm writing a book about a famous person who lived in your building. Could I just stop by for 10 minutes of your superintendent's time? And none of them ever answered me. So I resorted to undercover reporting. And I made appointments to as if scouting these places for rent. So for my daughter and my niece. And it's true, they have lived in New York. They're just not renting where Zoe lived and worked. So I weaseled my way in and I stood where she stood, documenting desperate immigrant poverty, literally in her apartment on East 15th Street between First and Second Avenues.
As an active and well-known and prolific writer during her lifetime, she really isn't well known today. Why do you think that is?
She wrote and published an essay predicting her own death, mailed it out, and then had heart failure and died. And it was incredibly sudden. And she had a daughter who inherited her material, her literary estate, who was living in Zoe's small town in Kentucky. A little old dog kennel town is how Zoe described this town in
Yeah.
Kentucky, Harrodsburg. And her daughter had no New York publishing connections to keep her mother's words in the public eye. She tried. She sent out, issues of the magazine to historians, this kind of thing. There was a New York City bookseller who claimed to be the executor of her literary estate, but her descendants have never heard of him, so he clearly made that up. She had a couple of friends who'd been promising writers who ended up serving in World War One. And at least one of them came back damaged and traumatized by, including by mustard gas, and having seen
Mm.
terrible, terrible things on the battlefield. And he never realized his promise as a writer. Would he have written something about her had he come back from World War One in better health? We don't know.
Her work was done during the Gilded Age, a time period that's quite popular right now. But she wrote about different things, shed a different kind of light on the time period, don't you think?
We're in another Gilded Age in many ways because there's immigrants in cages being deported and sobbing and begging for someone to pull one last government string so they could stay in the promised land that the rest of their family had gotten into. I'm quoting from Zoe's descriptions of going to visit Ellis Island. And we have billionaires building gilded ballrooms once again, while there are people starving and freezing on the streets. We have the terrible economic disparity that Zoe witnessed. It's one reason, but because there is a TV show called The Gilded Age, and my book says Gilded Age journalist, it draws people in. But the aspects of New York from the Gilded Age that she covers are not well covered elsewhere. She's seeing men, women, children tottering under enormous burdens. She's seeing 8-year-old chain-smoking newsboys on the street corners. She's seeing little kids at the Hudson waterfront picking up bits of kindling to put in sacks on their back. They're alone. They've been sent out to gather wood that can be burned in the wood stoves in their unheated tenement apartments in the winter.
Yeah, and it was everywhere. So I mean, and when I mean, it appears to me from reading about her that she just could not write it. She had to write it, which is so amazing. Um, I mean, you alluded to it a little bit before, but why do you think telling her story now is an important thing to do? And did you think about that as you were, getting ready to publish a book about her?
I, as the granddaughter of immigrants who'd escaped from dire poverty and violence in Ukraine, I was fascinated by her coverage of immigrants. I had no idea that with every passing day, this story would become more relevant. When I give talks and I look around the room when I'm describing how Zoe documented desperate immigrant poverty and begged for government reforms to help these people, and had a whole group of friends who were trying to combat xenophobia, combat anti-Semitism, enact basic reforms like cleaning out the trash cans on the streets of the Lower East Side so they didn't spread deadly disease the way the trash cans got neatly emptied in wealthier neighborhoods right nearby. When I give talks, I see people's eyes, in some cases water, when I talk about the treatment of immigrants. And I'll give a talk at a book club, and then people will ask me some questions about my research and my connection to Zoe, and what has surfaced since the book came out, and then they will begin to tell their own family's immigrant stories. And they will say, we narrowly survived at this turning point, and we narrowly survived at this turning point. One woman in her 70s raised her hand and said, I had to crawl on my belly as a little girl, silent in the darkness, to get from Hungary to get out of communist Hungary and to get across the Austrian border. And we could
Mm.
see the spotlights that indicated that was Austria, and that's what we were crawling towards. I was silent on my belly as a little
Mm.
girl. And then somebody emailed me after one of my recent talks and says I was sobbing at the section on immigration. I had no idea that it was terribly important to me. I mean, I had family who one branch of the family the ship they were supposed to take from Ukraine to New York, they had to cancel at the last minute. Someone got sick, and that ship sank on the voyage over. And the ship they did manage to take, that one sank on a voyage back. And they were
Ah,
grateful to be alive in the promised land. I had no idea that that particular aspect of my book would resonate increasingly. She also wrote about housing and the dire conditions in tenements in her time. And yes, I had no idea that a mayor would be elected in New York with a platform that had three pillars: affordable housing, and affordable housing.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, so you're going to be speaking at Harmony Hall in Sloatsburg on March 8th at 2 p.m. Give us a little sneak preview of what attendees will learn.
I've been giving talks year after year at Sloatsburg's Harmony Hall, an unbelievably beautiful 1840s building. So I'm a city person, and that to me is a trip way out in the country with the gorgeous hillside views. And every time I go to Harmony Hall, they have fixed up something else. It's more beautiful with every trip. So I can promise you a gorgeous house museum to explore, and I can also promise you really vivid imagery because Zoe worked with fantastic illustrators, including a man named William Oberhart. He was an up-and-comer when she worked with him in the 1910s. He went on to enormous fame, including for illustrating the first covers of Time magazine in the 1920s. I can promise you a really, really, really visually delicious a PowerPoint presentation.
The images in the book are also amazing. The photographs and, as you said, the illustrations. And then some of them say, author's collection. So you finding these things where? In like eBay? And like, how do you find everything?
Good eye, Claire. Yes, author's collection. So I often joke that I have benefited from the fact that I write about people who died with their and have their works completely out of copyright. Right? If you write about someone who died before 1930 or so, you've got out of copyright. I own more of Zoe's work in print, I suspect, than she did. And 95% of it has come off of eBay. I buy her work in print. I've got the complete run of her magazine, The East Side, 29 issues. I believe it's the only complete run in private hands. And there's only a handful of institutions that have the complete run. And I buy works about her that mention her, and I buy works by family members. She's multiple descendants, collateral, direct and collateral, who are actors, and I buy their signed headshots on eBay. That's fun. Her grandson's grandson is the actor Chris Stack, who has been in that wildly successful Broadway show Stereophonic. So I collect
Ah, yeah.
memorabilia related to that. I own, at last count, 45 or so silhouette, humorous captioned postcards illustrated in around 1905 or so by her ne'er-do-well second husband.
Oh, as you said, she was born in Kentucky. She had a stint of time in Kansas, which as you said, she did not enjoy. Are either of those places, do they have information about her? Like, are her the places where she lived other than New York, are they familiar with her and do they, um, have collections?
In Kansas, a branch of her family homesteaded there, around a town called Ellsworth at the Kansas frontier, on land besieged by drought, cyclones, locusts, terrible isolation, constant wind. The historical society there has some material related to her family. And in Wichita, they have material related to her family's life there, including they have photographs of her first husband that survived there.
Okay,
He
interesting.
ran a series of specialty grocery stores there,
Hmm.
and they're very aware of her story. Had a wonderful a lecture and book signing at the historical museum in Wichita. In Harrodsburg, her hometown, her little old dog kennel of a hometown, the local historical society owns her books She published novels and a short story collection. They own her books and they own her magazine issues. They own photographs related to her and her family, paintings. She had an in-law there who was he made bourbon whiskey, and they've got material related to him. And her daughter was named Clarence. Clarence and her second husband, who was named Fletcher Chelf, had a daughter named Mary, born years after Zoe's death. But Mary became a globe-trotting soprano, a performer. She eventually retired to Harrodsburg, and in memory of the grandmother she never knew, she founded the Ragged Edge community nonprofit theater on the main street in Harrodsburg. So there's the Ragged Edge Club that she founded and ran in New York, dedicated to the killing of care with a K, the Ragged Edge Club with a K. There's a theater named in her memory, and they are very vividly aware of her story there. And there's an antiques dealer right next door to the Ragged Edge Theater who has an entire shrine to Zoe
Oh, that's
and
great.
her family. He's got publications and photos, and yes, she's one of the most famous people to come out of Harrodsburg.
That's amazing. That's great. I think I remember reading that she said, although I'm not from New York, it's the only place where I feel like I belong. Is that what she said?
She called herself the immigrant from Kentucky. And she wrote vividly about how she felt most at home in New York. Her hometown was small and gossipy. When she lived in Wichita, it was full of pretentious nouveau riche and again quite gossipy. The newspapers would report on what you had served at your whist party. She loved being among strange faces in
Yeah.
New York, the streams of humanity, carving riverbeds between the skyscrapers with windows flashing back the fire of the sun. She loved it best in New York.
Any final thoughts?
I cannot encourage researchers more strongly to call or email descendants of people who knew someone you're researching, because this is an endlessly mobile nation. But you can't believe how often I reach somebody, and often it's a man because the last name hasn't changed. And I say, "You're a direct descendant of so and so who knew my biography subject, Zoe Anderson Norris. Has the family ever heard of her?" And he will say, yeah, I remember something about her. I think she predicted her own death. Why don't you call my sister? Because it's women, Claire, who are the keepers of papers and stories. You can't imagine how often in this fast-moving, endlessly mobile nation people say, "We've got a box of papers in the garage."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
And so that's one final thought. The other final thought is I could not encourage people more enthusiastically to make sure you get your family story down, because your grandmother's not going to want to talk about it, but even if it requires Sunday after Sunday, a walk around the pond again and again and again, get the story down, because she's not going to live forever and she's not going to want to talk about it necessarily, but write it down. And don't just put it on your phone. Type it up and put it and print it out and put it in some format that's not going to get lost if you lose that device.
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you so much for being here again. I can't wait to see you at Harmony Hall. The book is called Queen of Bohemia Predicts Own Death, Gilded Age journalist Zoe Anderson Norris, and it's published by Fordham University Press. The author, of course, is Eve Kahn. So when is the book officially coming out? Is it out now or
Yeah,
when?
the book came out in September, and I've been giving talk after talk, but nothing's going to rival the talk at the 1840s gorgeously restored, ever more restored Harmony Hall in Sloatsburg.
Oh, perfect way to end. I love it. So thank you, Eve, so much. I'm really looking forward to coming to the talk. I know it's going to be like your other talks, just fascinating. I love it.
I promise it'll make you weep as well as laugh,
Oh, that's
Claire.
great. Yes, we love that. It's an honor to speak to you. You're just an amazing researcher and historian and writer. It really is a privilege to speak to you and be able to interview you.
Thank you, Claire. This is our third go around. It's ever more fun. Thank
Oh,
you,
that's great.
Claire.
We'll see you on March 8th at Harmony Hall.
See you at March 8th. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Take care.
Keep in mind that all the information we discussed will be available on this show's show notes and at rocklandhistory.org. Once again, Eve Kahn's presentation will take place on Sunday, March 8th, 2026 at 2 p.m. at Harmony Hall, Jacob Sloat House. It's located at 15 Liberty Rock Road in Sloatsburg, New York, and tickets are $25 for non-members or $20 for members. You can purchase tickets online at fohh.org. That's fohh.org. Space is limited, so don't wait to get your tickets. And I hope you'll tune in to the next Crossroads of Rockland History, which will begin streaming on Monday, March 16th. Check out the Historical Society of Rockland County's website, where you can learn about all the events and programs on tap. Our web address is rocklandhistory.org, or you can call us at 845-634-9629. That's rocklandhistory.org or 845-634-9629. Another great way to keep up with us is to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, or read our blog on Tumblr. And don't forget that past episodes of Crossroads of Rockland History, and there are 180 of them, are archived at rocklandhistory.org as podcasts, and you can also find them archived on all major podcast platforms. I'm Clare Sheridan. Thanks for listening to Crossroads of Rockland History.